Well, the Miami Dolphins must begin preparing for a Week 3 contest against the Seattle Seahawks. Many Dolphins fans are still left wondering about the possible outcomes of the latest in the Tua Tagovailoa saga. We're looking at that here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami, and the NFL Draft Lead for the 33rd team. You can find all of our shows here on the Locked On Network on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Tip of the cap to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it. We live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. I know everybody has different thoughts on how to handle this conversation, and I'm staying completely away from the Dolphins should do this or Tua should do that, or they have been very clear. Mike McDaniel, with his post-game press availability, his day after press availability, very clear that weighing in on the actual decision that needs to be made. And I know Ian Rappaport and NFL insiders came out before the Sunday slate yesterday and said Tua has no plans to retire, right? I don't want to touch any of that. His choice is his choice. It's been reported he's going to meet with some independent neurologists. He did that after the concussion that was suffered against Cincinnati in 2022. Reports indicating yesterday that going into those meetings, he has no intention to retire. Now, what those meetings tell him about the long-term implications of this head injury and how severe it is versus concussions are a very complicated thing, and I am not a neurologist. I'm not a traumatic brain injury specialist. I'm not on the Dolphins medical staff or training staff. I'm not on the coaching staff. I'm not a part of Tua's camp. So I can't intelligently talk about those things. And trying to speculate about them amidst all the questions that exist feels like it would be an irresponsible thing to do. So we're not going to. But today we are going to look at, courtesy of some work that was done over the weekend, all of the different outcomes, potential outcomes, and what they look like. And then I kind of have some strong convictions about where I would go from here. And I think the first thing that, many of the Tua skeptics of Tua were apprehensive about a contract being done in the first place. Obviously, a contract was signed in training camp at the start of camp. By game 2, there was a heat of the moment, competitive moment in which Tua allowed that moment, I think, to get the best of him. Because all of the play that he had put on display in 2023 illustrated reserved judgment in moments of contact. And in against a division rival, down 3 touchdowns, trying to make a play happen, I get it. Unfortunately, I think there's a very heavy price to pay for it. And the questions that now will linger in the heels of this moment raise a lot of questions. And that's a large part of the large amount of unknown that I think has a lot of Dolphins fans either apathetic entirely or very anxious and apprehensive. But Tua does have the right to make this choice first. I think that's the first thing. But when the Dolphins signed the contract, the risks of signing the contract were well documented. I was a proponent of getting a contract done based on a couple of things. A, it's very important how you write the contract. And the Dolphins when this contract was revealed in its entirety, um, did what they usually do. They did find ways to protect themselves, and we'll get into that when we get into the potential salary cap implications based on outcome from Tua, whether he continues to play, whether he continues to play in Miami, or if he continues to play somewhere else, if he voluntarily hangs it up, or if he is not medically cleared to return to the game, which is the most unlikely, it sounds like, of all of the outcomes. So there's a number of things the Dolphins did to protect themselves, but the risk, I thought, was worth the reward to go into a year in which you're expected to compete, to have your quarterback present for all of training camp and locked in, as long as you found ways to protect yourself. The Dolphins did that. The disheartening thing was that part of the support of getting the contract done and locking it into place so that everybody can move forward focused on football was you kind of generally assumed that the risk averse style of play was going to be the new norm, because that's what he showed that judgment in 2023. But a little bit more about that is going to come when we get into where I would go from here in salary cap implications based on outcome for the Dolphins and Tua. What I would say first and foremost is when the doctors collaboratively decide that Tua Tagovailoa is medically cleared, he does have the right to make the first decision, whether he wants to continue to play football or not. Early reports suggest he has all intentions of continuing to play football. And he has every right to do that. And I think we as human beings, it's his life, it's his career. You should respect that. You can be interested in the self interests of the person and the player, but it is his choice to make. And the Dolphins, it sounds like, are going to allow him the opportunity to make that choice for himself first. But as we're about to go over, Tua Tagovailoa has the right and will make his choice first once the doctors say he's recovered from this latest concussion. But Tua Tagovailoa is not the only party here that has a choice to make, depending on how the waterfall of choices goes. So we're going to look at some of the outcomes, the salary cap implications of those outcomes for the Dolphins. And that's next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. So make sure that you stick with us. PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active users. PrizePicks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports because, unlike in other apps in PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers, not you against all those 5 million other active members. All you have to do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you can watch your winnings roll in. Throughout the entire month of September, one Caleb Williams passing yard will get you one win on PrizePicks. So you don't need a win, thankfully, for the Bears, now sitting at 0-1 for the week after their loss last night to the Houston Texans. But one Caleb Williams passing yard checks a box for you for your PrizePicks combos. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNFL on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. Dolphins will be away on Sunday in Seattle for week 3. So if you find yourself locked in at the house and watching the game and you get that appetite, that mid-game appetite, you want to have your post-game meal ready to go from your favorite restaurant, make sure that you get your favorite local cuisine courtesy of DoorDash. Football is finally back, and that means it's time to order all of your favorite game day foods. Take the extra legwork out on game day, kick up your feet, and allow DoorDash to bring it to you. You can use code LOCKEDFALL24 for 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order. It's a limited time offer. Terms do apply. Promo is not valid for orders containing alcohol. DoorDash, your door to game day greatness, your door to more. Download the DoorDash app now to order your game day favorites. Must be 21 or older to order alcohol. Drink responsibly. Alcohol available only in select markets. So, Jason Fitzgerald of Over the Cap did the full legwork on the possible outcomes from a salary cap perspective with a new 4-year, $212.4 million contract that the Dolphins and Tua agreed to at the beginning of August. And I'll give you the quick and dirty of it instead of getting really in the weeds on all of it. But the waterfall of scenarios that Jason Fitzgerald goes over, and there's a fourth one that he does not include, but that's, you'll get it when you hear it. Tua Tagovailoa voluntarily retires from the game of football. Tua Tagovailoa's injury prevents him from continuing to play football. Those two things are the first step in the process. Tua and his doctors working through, obviously he's got to go through concussion protocol. Doctors have to clear him. And then he needs to make the decision for himself. Do you want to play or not? And again, the reports suggest he's going to want to continue to play. The Dolphins, this is where their decision comes in. When they signed the contract, they did put in an exit ramp after the 2024 season because his 2026 salary that's a part of the $167 million in guarantees does not guarantee until March 14th of 2025. So the Dolphins will have until mid-March to make a decision, assuming Tua is cleared medically and is given the opportunity and chooses to return to the game. The Dolphins will have to look at this situation. And depending on what that timeline looks like, they may not have a decision to make about whether he gets back on the field or he may not ever get cleared in general. And then the Dolphins will not have the choice to make because they will not have cleared through enough steps to get to their turn to make a decision. But this is why you always talk about it matters how you structure contracts and why it probably was part of the reason why it took so long for the parties to come to an agreeable agreement. The Dolphins put an exit into the contract after the 2024 season that would only guarantee him his 2025 salary and nothing else, assuming he is not waived for injury purposes. So again, that medical clearance from this injury is a big piece of the puzzle here. And then obviously the fourth outcome is the Dolphins and Tua continue onward with their new contract, and they put this behind them and they work through it and they move into the future in 2025. According to Over the Cap's numbers, and these numbers all check out because I have the numbers of the contract and I worked it myself just to make sure it made sense. If Tua were to choose, if he were medically cleared and chooses to retire, the only money that he would receive, and the Dolphins would have the right to pursue retroactively prorated portions of this, would be his 2024 salary, which is equal to approximately $43 million. Much of that is signing bonus. And if the Dolphins were to have Tua Tagovailoa retire, they could process that as a post-June 1st, or they could process that all up front for 2025. The total amount of dead cap is about $33.5 million, $33.6 million. He's currently on the books for about 39. So you would be actually saving money against the cap space if Tua just decided to walk away. And if you did it post-June 1st, you could actually split it up and it would be 8.4 in dead cap in 2025 and 25.2 in dead cap in 2026. This does not sound like it's a very likely outcome, right? And for some, you may feel like, Kyle, why are you talking about this? You just had a head injury on Thursday. I get it. But I don't want to have the conversations everybody else is having about what he should do because he has the right to choose for himself. So instead, we're just going to present the facts of what the different scenarios mean for the Dolphins and what they mean for Tua. All other future finances, guaranteed or otherwise, he would surrender the moment that he retired from the game. So his $51 million in guaranteed salary for 2025, if he retires, he obviously does not collect that. In that scenario, if he would play in 2024, and and played on the 5th-year option, it would have been $23 million and change. You're looking at about $19-20 million more. In this outcome is the price you paid to get a contract done to try to lock in and get everybody happy and rowing in the same direction and on the same page and focused on football. If Tua is not medically cleared, this is where it gets very, very messy. The Dolphins are facing the prospect of if he were medically forced to retire, and it sounds like this is the least likely outcome. He would have in total $167 million in guarantees, but part of that is the $43 million signing bonus that he already was paid out. So now you're doing 167 minus 43. You're talking about 120 something million dollars. It would be the equal amount of his 2024, 2025, 2026, and then $20 million from 2027 would be what is owed to him as guaranteed for injury. The Dolphins do have, and this was reported by, I believe, Jason Fitzgerald of overthecap.com, they have a $49 million insurance policy that protects them if they had to move on from Tua due to injuries that forced him to medically retire. They could collect up to a $49 million insurance policy. They get rebated that against the salary cap. So the difference of if they were to simply take the exit ramp in his contract after this year, and if he were forced to medically retire, you offset the $50 million of that difference because the Dolphins can get that back in an insurance policy and it's refunded to them. So that's another way in which the Dolphins took steps to protect themselves with an early out in the contract and then effectively 1 year's worth of the 3 years in guaranteed salary, 3.5 years of guaranteed salary that was given to him for injury, they would get kicked back from the insurance policy. Over the Cap proceeded to outline, it's a pretty extensive proposition for how they could manage this through time, looking at the guarantees, not being able to pass a physical, suggesting that they could carry him on the PUP and spread out some of the cap charges. This is what he ultimately comes to if Tua Tagovailoa was not medically cleared to return to the game of football. If they really wanted to do restructures with him on the PUP, they could keep kicking the can down to 2029 if they follow the basic framework of his contract as it is currently constructed. Ultimately, Miami could account for $157 million in cap charges as is follows. And remember, he's got about a $9.5 million cap hit this year. So that's the full future outlook with the guarantees. 38.6 in 2025, which is what he's regularly scheduled for. 55.6 in 2026, and then 21.4 in 2027, $20 million in 2028, and $22.2 million in 2029. Would effectively work as dead money, even though you're carrying him as a non-cleared to return to action player under contract with the team, just to avoid a mass acceleration of all of the guaranteed monies coming to the front. With that said, with the insurance policy, it is $49.3 million that you get kicked back. Could that theoretically be applied to the 2026 year? That's $55.6 million. I don't know what the repayment schedule of that is, but they could massively soften that blow if it came to that with Tua not being cleared to return in that hypothetical world. But then there's the Dolphins choosing to move on. We'll talk a little bit about that and then kind of where I think the Dolphins should consider going from here. That's next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. Make sure that you stick with us. Say you want to head spur of the moment down to a game. We're getting ready for the start of some of the other leagues. It is the heart of football season. The Canes are looking dominant. The Dolphins will be on primetime on week 4 against the Tennessee Titans for a potential revenge game. When you want to go to the game, make sure you get your tickets with Gametime. They take the guesswork out of buying tickets. They give you panoramic sightline view from your seat, so there's no guesswork. They have all-in prices up front, so there's no surprise fees when you go to check out your tickets. And in just a few taps, you can get your tickets delivered directly to your phone, and then you can head on your way. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's game time. Say the Dolphins choose to take their own exit ramp. Say Tua is cleared to return. Tua decides he wants to play. Whether that happens at the end of the season or that happens in the heart of the season. If Tua decides whenever he is cleared that he wants to play, and it's in the midst of this season for Miami, I think you let him play. You need him to be the best version of yourself as a football team with how you've constructed yourself. But if it happens at the end of the year, kind of all the Dolphins information that they would have would be, well, hypothetically up to 15 missed games due to this latest injury. I don't know that it'll take that long. But you don't know how the body's going to respond. So it's a total unknown. So it makes this very difficult. But the Dolphins will have until March 14th to decide one way or another whether or not they want to proceed forward with Tua into 2025. But if you sign yourself up for 2025, just know, and he's medically cleared, you're signing yourself up for another, in cash, $55 million in fully guaranteed salary for 2026. So after this year, it's either 1 year with him not on the team, or it's at least 2 years with him on the team with the questions that exist. People have asked me, do you anticipate the Dolphins would consider doing that? I don't know whether they're going to consider or not, but what I do know is they had enough wherewithal to put something in the contract when they wrote it down and when they agreed to it to have an exit ramp after this year with only 1 year's worth of additional salary fully guaranteed. Right? His 2025 salary is guaranteed no matter what, unless he chooses to walk away and retire. So if you had the wherewithal to put it in, I don't see how what has now transpired wouldn't at least make you stop and ask yourself, assuming he's cleared to return and chooses he wants to continue to play, whether or not you should take it. And I think some of that, whether or not you should or should not take it, depends on what the rest of this season looks like. The wheels fall off the bus. Does he clear to practice coming out of the bye week, going to Indianapolis? And does he play and stay healthy the rest of the season? And the Dolphins get hot and make the playoffs? Is he cleared to return in late December and doesn't come back and the Dolphins choose to just leave him on injured reserve at that point because the season's completely fallen off before he gets back? I would say this. I was very much a proponent of getting a contract done. I will always root for Tua as a person and as a player. And I am open to the outcome of this season, whatever it looks like with Tua individually and as the team as a whole, to Tua still being a piece of the puzzle, right? If he's cleared, if he makes the right decisions to protect himself and finds ways to win football games for Miami, then yeah, I could see a world in which if the Dolphins, if he makes a healthy, triumphant return, stays healthy, the Dolphins make a run and make the playoffs and achieve the goals that we had at the beginning of the offset of the season. Let's go. We'll strap up. We'll move forward. But even in that scenario, I would be drafting a potential viable starting quarterback early in the 2024 NFL draft or 2025 NFL draft. They have a first and a second round pick. That is a bit of a gut punch, given that you would, in the scenario in which Tua is still on the team, and the team also chooses to move forward with Tua after Tua chooses that he wants to move forward with his career, that pick could go a long way in getting your team more competitive and more deep and more stable with players that are currently either veteran players or on short-term contracts or whatever. But the current build-out of the quarterback room as constructed, with a player who has now, unfortunately, regressed with the element of protecting yourself within the game. And I've said this many times. I said this last week when Tua missed the throw to Tyreek Hill because Devin Lloyd was blitzing off the edge and had a free run on Tua. I would rather him miss plays and protect himself and stay healthy than sit in there and make plays and expose yourself to unnecessary risk. And there's a whole debate. There's a whole debate about, is that fair to the team? Is that fair to Tua? And I see both sides of that. And I understand it's very complex. It's very difficult. But if this recovery window stretches to a certain point and the Dolphins lose enough games, I'd probably take the exit ramp that they built into the contract, which would be it'd be a $33 million dead cap charge or a $38 million dead cap charge in 2025, and then a $45 million dead cap charge in 2026. That's going to be equal to about 13% of the salary cap in each of the next 2 years. And if you took the exit ramp and you found a young quarterback and signed a veteran quarterback to kind of serve as a bridge, as a competitive bridge, even if that means you have to be aggressive to go get a talented young quarterback, there's enough talent elsewhere on the roster that you can compete through this unfortunate transition and have the salary cap implications clear. I think either way, whether Tua is here, whether Tua is not here, whether Tua chooses to retire, if the team chooses to move on from Tua, if everybody rallies and gets back on the horse and they make a run, I don't know how you don't justify having another viable starting quarterback option, because within 2 games of this contract being done, the very question that existed that you're expecting a player is going to protect himself to avoid has now come back into focus, and with indefinite consequences for both him and his team. And I don't say any of this to be callous to the situation that exists with Tua, but as just the facts of the situation, Tua has the right to make the decision first, but Tua is not the only party that has a decision to make here. And because of how the Dolphins structured their contract, they've given themselves an opportunity to say after this year, even if you want to keep playing, we will be going in a different direction. And again, I was very supportive of Tua. I am very supportive of Tua. Whatever decision he makes, I'm going to support. But there's no outcomes for me, I think, this season where you don't get to the offseason and say, we have to add a viable starting option. And then you get into this whole weird conflict because the offense is tailored so much to the strengths of your player. What talent exists that can replicate much of that? And if that doesn't exist, does that change your decision? I don't know. Like, a lot of it's going to depend on how the next 3 months play out for me personally. But I will be a proponent of a significant investment in the quarterback room. Not necessarily dissimilar to the way the Philadelphia Eagles signed Carson Wentz to a contract, and then they drafted Jalen Hurts in the 2nd round. And depending on how it goes, it might not necessarily be different from how the Kansas City Chiefs were committed in paying Alex Smith and found an opportunity and were aggressive and went aggressive to go get Patrick Mahomes. I'm not saying the Dolphins are going to go get Patrick Mahomes, but those teams have had those instances of investing in a quarterback and circumstances dictating, hey, this is too good of an opportunity to pass up, or hey, we need to protect ourselves from Carson Wentz or the ceiling that existed over Alex Smith. Unfortunately for Miami, and I think that was always a potential possibility with how things played out with Tua, but I think these circumstances have kind of accelerated that potential timeline. So if you're interested, overthecap.com does have the full article with all of the salary cap breakdowns, but here's the waterfall flow of which these things need to happen. Doctors need to clear Tua to return, whatever that timeline looks like. And once that timeline is over, Tua then needs to make a decision. Earlier reports suggest, at least going into the meeting with the neurologist, he has no intention of retiring. but he has to make that decision for himself after he educates himself when this process plays out. At that point, if he chooses to continue playing, if he chooses not to continue playing, he would collect this year's salary. The Dolphins, I would assume, would let him keep the signing bonus. It's an assumption on my part, but they would have the right to pursue retroactively 4 out of 4/5 of the signing bonus. If he chooses to play, the Dolphins will then have their March 14th decision to make on whether to waive him and he'd be cleared. So there'd be no injury designation that would accelerate all these extra injury guarantees in his contract, and cut bait and say you get your signing bonus and you get your 2025 salary fully guaranteed. And that's it. No more. We'll take your cap hit for 2025 and we'll take a dead cap hit for 2026 and move on. Or they move forward as the contract is currently dictated. But even in that scenario, I think you have to add a significant starting option to the quarterback room. With the durability being back in the forefront of this conversation. And again, you knew the risk when they were negotiating the contract. I thought the risk did outweigh the reward. And I think that's still true when looking at how the contract is worded and the ways and the outs and the avenues that they have within the contract. But a lot of this stuff has to happen first. But at least hopefully this serves as a primer for all of the different roads that this saga can go down now. That's going to do it for us here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. I appreciate you guys checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. We will be back again tomorrow as we begin our prep for the Seattle Seahawks in week 3.